السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. ما زلنا مستمرين مع حضراتكم في الرئيس والناس. النهاردة برضو هنقدم لكم لقاء مع واحد من الصحفيين البريطانيين اللي يعني ليهم مواقف متشددة ضد النظام الحالي في مصر. الرؤية عندهم قد تكون رؤية مش صحيحة، جزء منها انها بتكون رؤية متحيزة، جزء ان بعضهم عنده بعض المصالح. شركات العلاقات العامة بتشتغل بشكل جاد جدا في صالح جماعة الإخوان. هل معنى الكلام ده ان السفارة المصرية مثلا في بريطانيا واقفة؟ لا، ما هماش واقفين، هم بيحاولوا وبيسعوا. الحقيقة قابلت السفير الحقيقة تعرض لحملة كبيرة الفترة اللي فاتت، واعتقد ان الحملة ما كانتش منصفة لان هو بيجتهد بشدة هو وباقي العاملين في السفارة. يعني التقيت بالملحق العسكري والملحق الثقافي والسياحي والإعلامي، وكلهم الحقيقة بيشتغلوا بشكل جاد جدا، والوزير المفوض والقنصل وحتى يعني سكرتير أول السفارة. التقيت بالناس كلها، الناس بتبذل مجهود كبير جدا. طبعا في أمور بتأثر عليهم سلبا وهم بيشتغلوا. بعض الأمور اللي احنا هنا جوه مصر بنبقى شايفينها بشكل يعني منطقي أو متقبلينه. على سبيل المثال قضية اللي هي ما يسمى بخلية ماريوت الخاصة بالصحفيين. هناك في أوروبا في أمريكا بيتعاملوا مع هذه القضايا بحساسية بالغة جدا، وبتكون سبب في ان هم يبقى فيه هجوم كبير موجود على مصر. هل هذه القضايا التعامل معاها المفروض ان هو يكون باكثر حساسيه، ويكون في ادوات موجوده عند من يمثل مصر في الخارج عشان يقدر يتعامل معاها؟ طبعا. هل الامكانيات الماديه كافيه؟ بالتاكيد مش نفس الامكانيات الماديه اللي موجوده عند جماعه بتمولها دول وبتمول حملاتها الاعلانيه. امبارح في لقائي لو حضراتكم تابعتوه مع وزير الخارجيه نبيل فهمي، سالته قلت له انتم بتقولوا ان انتم هترشدوا الانفاق على البعثات الدبلوماسيه في الخارج، وكل الحكومه مطلوب منها انها ترشد الانفاق في الفتره اللي جايه، لكن في التعامل مع البعثات الخارجيه عندنا حاجات مهمه جدا لابد نعملها. مش معنى اننا داخلين على انتخابات الرئاسه في خلال 10 أيام ونتائجها هتظهر في خلال 15 يوم، فالحياة أول ما يبقى عندنا رئيس منتخب هتبقى الحياة سهلة وبسيطة، هتبقى أفضل بلا شك، هتبقى الدنيا بتتعامل معانا بشكل أفضل، وهيبقى منتظرين مننا أننا نحقق الاستحقاق الثالث بعد الدستور والرئيس، أننا نحقق استحقاق انتخابات البرلمانية اللي لازم عينينا تبقى عليها بشكل واضح، وتبقى عينينا عليها أنها تطلع بأفضل شكل ممكن. بالنسبة للانتخابات الرئاسية عشان ما نسبقش الأحداث، اللي مطلوب من الناس إنها فعلا تتوجه لصناديق الانتخابات، مش بس بالشكل اللي نزل بيه المصريين اللي موجودين في الخارج، لا بشكل أكبر وأفضل، لأن احنا بنقول إن اللي شاركوا في الانتخابات لغاية دلوقتي في الخارج يعني حوالي 250,000 من 1.5 مليون ليهم حق التصويت، يعني ده أقل من 20% من الكتلة التصويتية. هل ده اللي مطلوب انه يحصل جوه مصر؟ لا، اللي مطلوب يحصل جوه مصر اننا نتخطى ال 50% من الكتله التصويتيه، يعني كل واحد وهو مقرر انه ينزل يروح الانتخابات يبقى بيكلم اللي حواليه، بيكلم جيرانه، بيكلم معارفه، بيقول لهم يلا بينا. الناس بتتشجع مع بعضها، لان الفتره الحاليه فتره حرجه جدا، ولابد نتعامل معاها بكل جديه وبكل اصرار، اننا عايزين ننجح هذا الامر بأفضل شكل ممكن. إن الناس تركن على إن النتيجة محسومة، لا، النتيجة مش محسومة. إن الناس تركن على إن هي كده تمام ويعني ممكن حد يقوم بالواجب بدالي، لا، دي مش سنة ترك، ولكن ده هنا أنا عندي فرض موجود عليا إن أنا أنزل وأشارك في الفترة اللي جاية. إيه اللي هيحصل بعد كده؟ اللي هيحصل بعد كده عملية إصلاح إنها تبقى بتتعمل في مصر عشان خاطر نحرك اقتصادنا ونحرك حياتنا، وتبتدي الناس تشعر انها الحياة افضل بعد الانتخابات الرئاسية، دون توقعات انها تبقى يعني رائعة وبمبي، لان ده مش هيحصل. اللي عايز بس اقوله بعيدا عن موضوع الرئاسة، بما اننا بنتكلم عن الاخبار، طبعا في خبر محزن عن وفاة الفنان والإعلامي حسين الإمام عن عمر 63 سنة. البقاء لله، هذا الرجل الذي أمتع الشعب المصري بتمثيله وببرامجه البقاء لله في حسين الإمام. حاسبكم مع اللقاء اللي عملته في بريطانيا، وعايز أذكركم أننا مواصلين الرئيس والناس في الأيام القادمة. هنواصل تقديم الأرقام والإحصائيات عن مصر وعن قطاعات مختلفة. قدمنا القاهرة الكبرى وقدمنا الدلتا، لكن هنواصل باقي قطاعات مصر من الصعيد لسينا لغيره عشان نبقى عارفين مصر كويس من هنا لغاية فترة الانتخابات. هنكلمكم عن حاجات زي ما بنسميها رأسية في الاقتصاد، في القوات المسلحة، في غيره. نبقى مع نهاية الانتخابات نكون عرفنا مصر شكلها ايه وعاملة ايه، والرئيس اللي هيستلمها زي ما بنقول كده ايه، في خطاب حالة يقول الحالة في مصر كذا، زي ما يكون بيستلمها على سركي. هو عارف عنده ايه، احنا عارفين عندنا ايه وعارفين طالبين ايه، فنقدر نراقب ونتابع ونعرف بيحصل ايه. مع اللقاء المهم اللي انا سميته على الفيسبوك ان هو كان سجال بيني وبين هذا الصحفي. Mr. Peter Oborn, thank you very much for hosting us at your office. Very interesting office, and looks like the typical writer journalist who spends much of his time doing this job. Tell me how do you see, because you have many writings about the Middle East, tell me how you see the picture of the Middle East today.
Well, you had the Arab Spring, which for, I think, those of us in the West was, and I think many people in the Middle East, was a fabulously hopeful moment in history.
Right.
Because if you look back deeper and further, the record of Western powers in the Middle East is disreputable, even disgraceful. And so we had, in the aftermath of World War I and before even, set up a series of client states across the Middle East which did not have full popular legitimacy. Regimes in many countries where the ruling elite owed their allegiance really to the West and West or to Britain. And then after World War II, that America.
Well, if we've gone back to World War I, then we have to talk about the Balfour thing and how the State of Israel was created through the United Kingdom.
Yeah, absolutely. The Balfour Declaration, which happened just the same time, of course, as the Sykes-Picot French-British carve-up of Syria and Saudi and Iraq and so forth.
So you believe all the troubles started at that moment when Sykes-Picot and the Balfour Declaration, together with how the Western powers wanted to divide their territories of power and influence.
Well, certainly, I think now if you look back at what preceded that, the Ottoman Empire, at the time in 1917, and later, there was a tendency to view the Ottomans as decadent and almost worthless. With the benefit of history and of hindsight, I think it's possible to view the Ottoman Empire actually as something which worked pretty well for many years, and enabled quite an element of tolerance and of plurality. It looks more of an achievement now than it did maybe 50 years ago, the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, right now we can see the dreams of the Ottoman Empire to come back by the Turks at this. Isn't it amazing how history is just going into that cycle?
Absolutely. It is. What you realise about the events of the last few years is how much we have to learn from history.
Right.
And one of the problems of the Bush project, of the neoconservative project, was they didn't believe that history existed. They thought it was worthless. They thought you could build anew from nothing. But one of the things we've learned from studying the magnificent but also the tragic events of the last few years has been that history is very much present in everything.
Yeah. Okay, so you had gone to World War II when I interrupted you.
Yeah, so we have a period after World War II when America replaces Britain as the dominant power in the region and governs, and most of the countries, many of the countries are governed by regimes which owe their allegiance to Washington or maybe to London or to Paris, but not so much to the people. Egypt was very fascinating because you developed a different kind of narrative, an anti-colonial narrative with Nasser, who became the leader of the Arab world.
Right.
With enormous popular legitimacy. I have no question. There's no question that Nasser was a fantastically exciting leader. And he was a leader because he spoke for people who were very understandably wanted to reject and to repudiate the colonialism which they had suffered under.
So that happens, and right now, if probably you're following what's happening in Egypt, and you see that there is a revival of the Nasserite spirit.
Yes.
Why do you think this is happening at this particular moment, even though a country like Egypt has not come under occupation again? It's just been threatened in its identity, more or less, do you believe, or why are we calling back Nasser?
Well, I think let's look at what happened after Nasser went. Sadat, I think, was a great man, but he never achieved the recognition, maybe, which Nasser did. I think people have never been as generous to Sadat as he deserved. Mubarak, well, he became too much of an I speak as an outsider, and I'm not an Egyptian, and it seems to be too much of an American client. I feel that he allowed Egypt to become too much of a spokesman for the West. And also he was a representative of something which is a problem for Egypt, as it is for many other states, by the way. I've just come back from Pakistan. The army is too powerful in Egypt, much too powerful. It's not just politically, it has a deleterious effect, but economically, the power of the army in Egypt holds back economic growth and liberty.
It holds back the economic growth.
I believe.
All right. So that's, with the Mubarak thing, why now are we recalling Nasser?
Well, we then have the interlude of the downfall of Mubarak, Tahrir Square, and this was one of the most exciting moments for those outside, and I'm sure for those inside, in world history. You have Egypt is one of the greatest countries in the world, one of the most ancient countries in the world, with one of the most profound civilizations in the world, and one of the most sophisticated people in the world.
Right.
And you have lived under various forms of dictatorial rule for many, many centuries. And suddenly something is happening. And is this the moment when you're going to move to democracy or to a different form of political arrangement? Yeah. And that's why I was very happy when it was incredibly exciting when you had elections, when Mubarak went. And the question which I know everybody debates is what happened after that. But I personally felt that I'm not a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. Don't share its ideals, but I believe that Morsi won that election fair and square, and that was a fight. And one of the points about democracy is, even if people who you don't agree with win the election, you accept the result.
Right. We have a different point of view, of course. I always give this example. If you go and buy a can of beef and it says expiry date is 4 years, and you open that can and there are worms inside, you don't have to eat it because it says the expiry date is in 4 years' time. And the fact was, when we opened that can, it was not fit for human consumption. It was not fit for Egyptian consumption in that case. And this is why Egyptians revolted against that, because Egyptians, as you said, it's a great nation in terms of its long-lasting history. And that means you cannot lose your identity. We were losing our identity. Have you seen that? Have you detected that this is how Egyptians felt, that they were losing their identity?
There's no question that what you are saying to me reflects the opinions of millions. Well, we saw it in the streets. And I've been to Cairo and discussed it. You know, there are many people who feel as you do that the Brotherhood was setting off on the false path. I have read as much as I can about it as an outsider.
Sure.
And I would say that that they were not given a chance. I don't think that the errors or even the crimes, which some people would say, of the Morsi regime were sufficient to justify what I regarded as a military coup, just within a few months, really, of taking office.
Let me try and discuss that with you. Maybe we can come to a point of agreement. Crimes. Maybe this is something that is hardcore to talk about, but let me take you to the soft core of things. I remember being in the studio and having an interview with the lady in charge of the Opera House of Egypt, who was fired by the Minister of Culture, appointed by Dr. Morsi at the time. And all the artists in Egypt went into a strike. And they were insisting that we are going to fire all those people. None of these people who relate to culture will be there. And we're bringing our people who are, of course, not relevant to art, culture, opera, and stuff of the sort. You've been to Egypt. You lived near the old town. And you see what we call the Moulid, which is where people come from every part of the country to celebrate the birth of a certain Islamic icon. They tried to change that as well. And this is where people revolted. This is where people were angry. You are not going to change the way I have my culture and the way I perceive art because you want to appoint somebody who is not related to that field to be in charge of me and stop me from doing what I'm doing. You see, it's the softer part was at the heart of the problems. How did you see that? Did you ever see it coming?
I've heard people say things. I mean, I wasn't in Egypt during the Morsi period.
Good for you.
No, I wish I had been there. I think it's one of the most important and unresolved periods of modern history. I should just say that what has been happening in Egypt over the last few years is a vital moment in world history, which you are. What is happening now is going to determine the shape of the world in the 21st century. Egypt is probably the greatest country in the Middle East, certainly the most ancient, and what happens in Egypt will define the century we're going to live through. So I wish I had been there.
Okay. And
I have read about it. I've read about it as carefully as I can. And what I would say to you is that after the 4 years is up, there would be elections. The Egyptian people are open, absolutely could go to the polls and vote out the Morsi, the Brotherhood. And that would have been the way, I think, what should have happened. To interrupt after barely a year, wasn't it? The Morsi government...
It was exactly 1 year.
Yeah. With a military coup was a very, very sad and terrible thing.
What is considered, and I'm trying to get the idea from the Western minds, the military coup. When people go out on the streets and they say, we're not going home until this regime is deposed. Compare that to the millions who went out on the streets in January 2011 and they said, we're not leaving until we get rid of this regime. The army interfered in the first case and the army interfered in the second case. One case is called a revolution, the second case is called a coup. I can't see what the differences are.
I think there is a difference, which is that in the case where there is a military government or a dictatorial government or an autocratic government and there are no elections, street protests has a moral legitimacy which it doesn't quite have when there is a democratically elected government.
But Mubarak was democratically elected, even if it was done by forgery. Forgery.
Yeah.
There are some claims that there was forgery also in the presidential elections of Morsi, not as blatant as they were in the Mubarak regime. But if we're talking about form, elections. Reality may be a bit different. But in both cases, the people went out on the streets and they called on the military, please help, we cannot take this anymore. I'm not trying to convince you, I'm just trying to understand.
No,
this.
I do understand this, and I know from talking to many very honourable, honest, highly intelligent Egyptian people that that is what they felt. And I've seen the film The Square, which is very powerful. A sense of betrayal against the Brotherhood. I accept, though, that Morsi made mistakes. What I can't accept is that he had made such bad mistakes that he'd lost the right, the democratic legitimacy which came from winning in the ballot box.
Okay, so he made mistakes, but you don't think that they are that big? That's
absolutely
blatant.
not, no. And I think I would say one other thing, and this comes once again from as an outsider. I don't want to present myself as an expert on Egypt, because I'm not. That in many ways he wasn't enabled to rule. What you call, I think, in Egypt, the deep state remained in power after the elections. You know, many countries have the security apparatus, the army.
Isn't the UK a deep state as well?
I think there are elements of a deep state. I don't think it's nearly as profound in Britain. I mean, for instance, the military, certainly powerful, but it doesn't have the all-encompassing.
But the bureaucracy is here, and it is in power in Europe.
I am prepared to entertain the claim that the deep state is too powerful in Britain, but I don't think it's anything like as powerful as it is in Egypt.
I was just trying to understand, is deep state an insult, or deep state is a fact, or is something that you need to get rid of as you grow and as you progress? You get rid of the deep state, or it's something that remains with you?
I think it's something which almost all states... The United States clearly has what President Eisenhower brilliantly called the military-industrial complex. And to what extent that has been responsible for the series of foreign policy catastrophes from Vietnam to Iraq, which America has blessed the rest of us. I put that word ironically. So I'm not saying that the deep state is unique to Egypt.
To the world, or to... I'm just trying to understand how you perceive the concept of deep state, because
I'm a journalist, right? I'm a journalist. I don't like the deep state. I don't like secret power.
Okay.
I believe in freedom and democracy and free expression. That's what I believe in.
Yeah. So do I. I mean, everybody. But I wanted to know: is it a bad, insulting word, as it is in Egypt? Because it is a bad, insulting word. When you say the deep state, then you're talking about the monster, the something that you must fear that is hiding out there, the boogeyman. It's the deep state.
I think there's definitely an element of that, but I do emphasise that many countries possess something of the sort. Even Britain has an element of that.
Okay, so the deep state hindered Morsi from doing his job, as you were saying.
Is my impression. Yeah.
Okay, and then?
And then we had the
big failure.
You call it a big failure. I don't think we had the demonstrations. The question is, were they as big as reported? And to what extent were they funded from abroad?
Abroad?
I'm reporting to you what I have read and reported that Saudi Arabia...
That's the first time I hear that. I heard about funding. I heard people talking, and they've been attacked, about funding that happened for protests in 2011. Now it's funding done by Saudi Arabia.
So the suggestion is
2013.
Saudi Arabia 2013. Yeah.
Wow, that's the first time I hear that. So there is funding.
Certainly, the moment that Morsi fell, enormous amount of Saudi funding suddenly goes to Egypt
afterwards.
Yeah, and the claim. Look, there's no question. We've seen the photographs and the film of the crowds. No foreign power can generate that level of street protest. To what extent there was foreign interference in the downfall of Morsi is an open question, however.
So is this like a general perception in the West that the June 30th, we call it revolution, you call it...
Coup d'etat.
A coup d'etat.
Yeah.
Or you call it 3rd of July coup d'etat, And you call the 30th of June what?
Well, it's a problem.
Insurgency.
We're getting into nomenclature, but anyway, the army seizes power from and it was a gradual process.
No, I'm still talking before the army seizes power, when people were out on the streets. What do you call that? We call it revolution. You call it